Kansas teens exploiting a loophole in state law to get away with vaping, how one city is fighting back, plus a Kansas congressman under fire for alleged voter fraud, and follow the money. It appears to be leading to a Mike Pompeo for U.S. Senate campaign. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Mike Pompeo has denied multiple times that he's running for the U.S. Senate, but there are a lot of clues that keep saying, well, maybe he is. Cake's Taylor Adams takes a closer look at some of the latest ones.
I intend to stay in this current role just as long as President Trump says, I want you to be my most senior diplomat. That's the mission set.
Rumors have circulated for months that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo could run for retiring U.S. Senator Pat Roberts' seat. And Tuesday, more evidence. The Kansas City Star posted this article, reporting sources say Pompeo has reached out to Sheldon Adelson, the Republican Party's largest donor, to gauge interest in a potential run. It goes on to detail similar conversations with Charles Koch. Sources say both donors were receptive. Wichita State University political science professor Dr. Neil Allen says this certainly points to Pompeo running, but these conversations alone won't confirm a race.
The fact that he is talking to people that are big in Republican politics and often give money doesn't necessarily mean he's running for Senate or he's going to announce tomorrow or next week. Those are people that someone in his position would normally have contact with.
In September, Pompeo told Cake News directly that he would not pursue the race. However, on Tuesday, President Trump said a Senate run is still a possibility.
But if we thought we were going to lose that, I would have a talk to Mike. If you look at polling, Mike would walk away with that seat.
In Sedgwick County, the Republican Party says it won't take sides in a Senate race. But the county's GOP chair, Dalton Glasscock, says he supports any decision Pompeo makes.
And he's doing a great job in Washington, D.C. If he chooses to stay there, fantastic. And if he chooses to come back, I think he'd be a great asset to Kansas as well.
Again, that was Taylor Adams from Cake News reporting. The latest now, a report from The Hill that while in London for a NATO summit this week, Pompeo attended a meeting hosted by the Hamilton Society, which included several wealthy Republican donors. Well, joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and other issues, we have Representative Ed Berger, Republican from Hutchinson, and Representative Jim Ward from Wichita, Democrat. I know that. It's been a long week, guys. I apologize. And Dr. Michael Smith, a political scientist from Emporia State University. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Actually, Senator from the 34th District.
I knew I was going to do that.
I thought she promoted you.
Like I said, it's been a long week. For those who aren't aware, I have been wrapping up my personal thesis. I'm working on my master's in history, and my brain is a little scattered. I apologize now. But on topic, on Pompeo, as we look at this, we were looking at more and more clues that, yes, he may actually be running, but just how important, Michael, I'm going to start with you, are these financial meetings? Is this truly a sign, or is this something that he would have been doing anyway?
It's a sign that he's up to something, and running for an open Senate seat is a logical place to go. I will recycle what I said in 2018, which is that if Republicans who don't support Kobach want to beat Kobach, they have to have only one other candidate in the race. If there are multiple Republicans other than Kobach's, it's Kobach's to lose. That's exactly what happened in 2018. Had Jim Barnett and the other candidates not been in there, then I don't think Kobach would have been able to beat Collier. But you've got Susan Wagle in there, you've got Roger Marshall, you've got multiple other Republicans besides Kobach, and now possibly Pompeo. I don't think that's going to work.
Interesting. I can see you agreeing with him there, Jim.
I think there's 3 points about the Pompeo race. First of all, as a Democrat, I want him to stay out there playing as long as possible because he's sucking up the air in the room and nobody else can get any traction or raise any money because there's this 800-pound gorilla who's supposedly magic. And that gives our candidate a real good shot. Second thing is Pompeo's in a box now because he's waited so long. First of all, it looks like he might be jumping ship on a president who's going down like the Titanic and jump off at the last moment when he's been closely involved in all of that. And I think the third thing is he will cause hard feelings in the state, but winning makes everything better.
Ed, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Secretary Pompeo would be an excellent candidate, and I think he would really clear the field as far as the Republicans are concerned. And I think he would be very difficult to defeat in the Senate race. He has a lot of name recognition. He has a lot of presence. Certainly being a congressman from this district was very helpful. Being a Secretary of State gets him a lot of media coverage, a lot of name recognition, and that's just invaluable. So I think he would be a great candidate. Whether he decides to do that or not, that's going to be his option. I think President Trump has more or less cleared the way for him by encouraging him and saying he'd be a good fit for the U.S. Senate seat. So kind of wait and see. But it's his call, and when he decides to wade in. But there are a lot of great Republican candidates for that position. So wait and see.
Well, and we were talking a little bit before the show started about just how important the fundraising aspect of running a race is and how expensive some of these races are getting. Now, so far, Dr. Marshall, U.S. Representative Roger Marshall, has dominated the fundraising aspect, but we really don't know where Pompeo is at. We know what he has left in his...
He's got about $1 million left, as I understand it, in his campaign fund. But
Congressman.
So they're talking maybe $10, $12 million to run a U.S. Senate seat. So, but he's getting well positioned to raise that money and to be effective doing it.
His relationship with the Kochs will be interesting too, because this will be could be one of the first major efforts by Charles Koch since David Koch's death, and to see where they're going to go next.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that.
I think it's interesting who he's meeting with, which are the institutional Republican donors. Sheldon Alderson has always been one of the keystones or touchstones for Republicans when you're running. And of course, if you're having big dog meetings in Europe, he'll have the money. It's how will Kansans react to him leaving the president, especially at the critical times. The president's under impeachment right now. He's got several initiatives going through the House that involve foreign affairs, his trade agreements, and some of these other things. Will they perceive that as Pompeo being self-interested at the expense of the president? Or will they see him as some sort of savior of the Kansas Republican Party that they want to invest in? That's to be determined.
All right. Well, we've been talking about this race long before now, and we have many, many months before it resolves, so lots of time for things to change and things to pan out. Moving from the U.S. Senate to the U.S. House, Kansas Congressman Steve Watkins is facing allegations of voter fraud over what his spokesman calls an inadvertent error. The Shawnee County District Attorney is investigating. Last August, Congressman Steve Watkins changed his address on his voter registration. That new address showed him living at a UPS store in Topeka, not his official residence at the Overlook Apartments. His spokesman said that first address was a mailing address, and this was just an inadvertent error, saying both addresses are in the same county and same congressional district, so there was no improper purpose. But the Topeka Capital Journal, which broke this story, reports that error had Watkins voting in a different city council district than the one he lives in a race that was eventually determined by just 13 votes. The Shawnee County attorney told the Kansas City Star that, as with any alleged criminal conduct said to have occurred within Shawnee County, I have requested that local law enforcement investigate the matter. The Kansas Secretary of State's office says 17 people currently have voter registrations showing that UPS store as their home. The office says state law does allow people who don't have a recognized postal service address for their home to use post office boxes to register. And I think that's the part that caught me the most by surprise, is that there are homes in Kansas that don't have a postal address. How does that happen?
Evidently quite frequently from what the news report says. I think it's kind of interesting that people are using, or a number of people have used, the UPS office as a residence because that is a location where they receive mail.
Yeah. Is there a way to fix this?
Well, you got to realize that there's a significant homeless population in Kansas and in Shawnee County, and so that would be a way for them to participate in the democratic process. That doesn't, just because you're homeless doesn't disenfranchise you. But that's a whole lot different from a U.S. congressman forgetting his home address or re-registering a second time. And as a Democrat, we're going to have a very strong candidate. She's, I hope, we're talking to the mayor of Topeka, who's a very attractive and talented public policymaker. And this particular congressman has had an incredibly difficult time in only a year. Wasn't it this summer they were trying to get him to resign because of something? And he seems to continue to trip over himself. And he's also got a primary. Isn't the state treasurer's running against him?
Yes.
So this is just a series of problems. So this will be a race to watch this fall.
Most definitely. I mean, the issue that you're talking about, one of the other issues I should say that he faced during his original election race was actually a question of residency, because he didn't own a home in Kansas, but he owned homes his wife lived in Massachusetts, owned homes in Alaska. So there are some big questions about residency as well. And it is, Michael, I'm going to come to you, highly unusual for a sitting congressman in Kansas to face a primary opponent.
But maybe getting a little less unusual. But you're right. It kind of reminds me of Pat Roberts back in 2014, TV commercial showing his home being a recliner. And this issue of you don't live in the district comes around a lot. Serving in the United States Congress is a full-time job. It's fun to bash Congress. There are a lot of good reasons to bash Congress, but they have insane work schedules. As do state legislators when the legislature is in session, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, committee meetings, insane amounts of fundraising. We were just talking about that. And they have a job in Washington, D.C., but we want them to be responsive to the state. I don't think that what Watkins did was appropriate, particularly voting in a different district, the UPS store district, in that council race. But there is a real pushback on this whole idea of, well, how much time do you want them spending in the district? How much time do you want them working on legislation in Washington, D.C.? Pat Roberts is pretty well respected for the work he's done on behalf of Kansas, and he doesn't spend a whole lot of time in Kansas.
No.
I'm a big fan of candidates and people who represent an area having roots, having connection, whether it be city council or state representative, state senator, or federal people. They have to have some connection to their community, because ultimately the democracy, a representative democracy, only works if you have some feel for the folks that are sending you there. Now, Pat Roberts has always been an anomaly. Right. In that he has little contact with the state, but he does a good job for us on the ag stuff, and you can't criticize success. But I'm a fan of actually living in your district and having some connections, even though you do spend a lot of time in other places representing people.
I think Jerry Moran's an example of just a complete opposite. He makes
Very
huge
much so.
efforts to get back to his district every weekend if he can. Maybe with the Senate schedule it's more difficult, but he has really made that a cause of his to make sure he's visible, accessible, and people know when he's going to be there. And he's out at the coffee shops. He's done every place in his district as much as he can be. So that's maybe the polar opposite of a Pat Roberts, who has been in Washington for a long time as first an aide to Sebelius and following on up.
Yeah.
Some people say he served under Abraham Lincoln when he was
Could
his first term.
He very well could have.
He ages well.
Well, I'll say with Senator Moran, national media that have been here, especially when he was doing like some of the Medicaid expansion and other town hall meetings that he did, they were shocked at the fact that he was able to call on people by name.
Sure.
He knew his district, he knew his people so well that he could go and say, Nancy Brown, what did you want to tell me? Without having to look at cards, without having to for anybody. And that just shocked the national media that was here for that. And yet, yeah, those of us who've covered Senator Moran for a long time, that's kind of normal.
Kind of what his trademark is.
Yep, exactly.
Back in the day when we had more people cross party lines, so you'd have a Democrat serving a Republican district or the reverse, a lot of times those personal relationships were the reason why. They would go straight to the constituents and kind of go around that party label. But we see fewer of that. A lot of those folks have been eliminated. That we see a few governors, Laura Kelly is one of them, but they're kind of the holdouts. So that might be another reason why that responsiveness to the district these days isn't what we might wish it was.
Interesting point. Well, moving from the national level to the state level, a retired Wichita school teacher could make state history if she wins her race for the Kansas House. Not for her politics, but for her gender status. But she told me that's not why she's running, as I explained in the story I filed with Cake News earlier this week.
It is my hope that I will be someone they can place their hope in, that will stand for the things that they've already established that they believe in.
Stephanie Byers wants to replace longtime Democratic leader in the Kansas House, Jim Ward, who's looking to move on to the state Senate.
We're very early in the process right now.
A band teacher at North High for nearly 3 decades, she transitioned while teaching from Mr. Byers to Ms. Byers.
For me, being transgender is just another aspect of who I am. I'm also a member of the Chickasaw Nation. I ride a motorcycle. I'm a musician.
If elected, she'd become the first openly transgender legislator in the Kansas House or Senate.
I do realize that it could be Kansas historic for me to be elected in office and have a person who is transgender serving in our state legislature. But it's not the main emphasis of what's going on.
Byers says she's seen the need for Medicaid expansion in the state personally.
I've seen up close and personal young families that struggle with health care because they fell in a place that a simple expansion of Medicaid in the state of Kansas would help them immensely.
And she wants to be a part of figuring out how to make that work for Kansas. She'd also like to play a role in figuring out how to handle increased funding for the state's public school system.
I mean, the children of Kansas are the greatest natural resource we have. We owe it to them to provide them the best public schools we possibly can.
Now, Jim, I'm going to start with you. I spoke with you when I was working on this story a little bit, and you told me that you have heard from several people who are interested in the seat, haven't decided if you're going to make any endorsements yet, but you do know that district perhaps better than anybody else at this point. The 2 issues that Stephanie was bringing up, Medicaid expansion, education funding, are those issues that really resonate in your district?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the privilege of recruiting candidates, talking to new candidates. And one of the first pieces of advice when you run for office is elections aren't about candidates, they're about the voters, and talking about what concerns them and what's important to them. And in my district, it's kind of like Ed's district. They're going to lean Republican. My district leans Democrat, but they'll vote for the other team if they think that person represents their issues, their priorities better than the party nominee. So whoever gets nominated by the Democrats in the 86 has to address fiscal responsibility, public schools, public health, public safety. These are the things that people are talking about in the 86th.
And Michael, we are seeing kind of a change in attitudes toward the LGBT community. We have Brandon Woodard, we have Susan Ruiz in the Kansas House now. Mm-hmm. Is this something that could be detrimental, or is it, as Stephanie hopes, simply another aspect of who she is and separate from her politics?
Well, I think that her challenge is, my comments are going to be kind of similar to Representative Ward's. Her challenge is to be there on the issues. Mm-hmm. This is an urban district. It has many wonderful things about it. It also has its challenges with everything from funding schools to older infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot to do. And I think that the folks like the ones you mentioned, Woodard, Ruiz, and others, where they really excel is that they may happen to be LGBT, but who cares? The bottom line is they get it done for their district. And if she can position herself as saying, this is a part of me, I own this, I'm not repressing it, but let me tell you what I'm going to do for the schools and the roads, I think that's her best bet.
Now, and when I spoke with her, she talked about she hasn't filed yet because she wants to file by petition. Mm-hmm. How does that, as opposed to paying to file, how does that affect a campaign?
Well, I filed by petition the first time I ran, and I think it allowed me to make connection with voters, and also it helped tell me whether or not there was enough interest in my candidacy to make it genuine. And I think that's the validity of going about and filing by petition. Certainly you can write a check and file anytime you want to, but I think it's much more important to make that contact, make sure your constituents know who you are and how you plan to serve and what you represent. I think that's just crucial.
All right.
That's exactly, I want just to pony on that. And the other thing is, if you're going to win, you have to go talk to the voters, and it gets people out on doorsteps, and reduces that fear. What's that like? So doing it by petition is another way to get it. You got to get on the doorsteps.
Okay, well, we've got other stuff we need to talk about. One of the things lawmakers are going to have to deal with this session, which is your session still, before things may or may not change, is going to be taxes, possibly. Now, the Governor's Council on Tax Reform has handed in its recommendations, and they run the gamut from a food sales tax rebate to new laws on collecting internet sales taxes. Corinne Griffith from KSN's Capitol Bureau takes a look at one suggestion that would bring back a property tax fund designed to help local governments.
The local ad valorem tax reduction fund has been in place for years. A percentage of the state sales tax is supposed to be distributed across the state.
That goes to the local governments in order for them to reduce mill levies and reduce the property tax in local governments, whether they're cities or counties.
However, the state government has not funded this program since 2003. And as Kansas taxes continue to be some of the highest in the nation, residents say any tax relief is welcome.
Wade and I have been in the community for over 20 years.
Abby and Wade Wastel have made Topeka their home, and now they work to get others in their own homes. But the high property taxes in Kansas can make that difficult.
They don't see that other places, and so I've lost clients that decide to go to different communities because they don't have that, and it's very unfortunate.
Prior to 2003, nearly 4% of the state sales tax was distributed to local governments. If the fund is restarted, that money will once again go toward reducing property taxes across the state.
It would be nice. We need to invest in our community. And, tax dollars are important, obviously, but so is home ownership.
The recommendation has been passed on to Governor Kelly, and she can decide if it will go to the legislature next year. At the Capitol, I'm Corinne Griffith.
Or if Kelly doesn't decide to take it on, then lawmakers can decide to bring it up themselves. But from the lawmakers I've spoken with, this seems to be getting a pretty positive vibe.
Well, I can speak to it from two different positions, certainly as a lawmaker, but also as somebody who was with a local government. I was president of a community college, and we lost practically a mill when they decided not to follow through with LABTR. So if you look at taxes, probably the tax that is most hated is property tax. And that we found out we weren't going to get LABTR in November, and it was a pretty significant hit for us. So I think it'd be very important to bring back LABTR. It makes a lot of difference, makes lots of local people feel better about the taxes they're paying and serving the public.
It's just, we talk with big words that are confusing. It's just a block grant. What we do is take some of the money we collect in sales tax and send it back to local communities in a block grant. And the deal is, and it's not a legal deal, it's just a presumed deal. We're going to give you this money. Don't raise your property tax levy. Try to maintain it, or if possible, reduce it. And that would be a huge benefit here in Wichita as we try to beef up our police force, as we try to do some of the development on the river that's being talked about, as we try to do a lot of the projects, just basic local street repair and that kind of stuff. So I have been supportive of it for years. We tried to put it back in 3 or 4 years in a row under the Brownback administration. So I really like this recommendation.
Okay. One other recommendation I just want to hit on real quick, and I just want yes or no answers from you two, is
like we're going to do that.
Dial it down.
Food tax rebate has been suggested. It would affect an estimated 400,000 Kansans. Is this something that you can see lawmakers supporting this session? Ed?
Yes.
Jim? What do you think, Michael?
I think the rebate, yes. I mean, ideally we'd want to get it off groceries altogether, but they just can't afford it right now. So they'll do this instead.
All right. Well, something else coming that I predict will be coming up is vaping. And I know I've had conversations with you about that, Jim, as well. There's one Kansas City that says state law left a loophole teens have been exploiting to get away with illegal vaping. So the city passed its own rules this last week, as I explained in this story I filed with Cake News.
As a parent, you just never know what's in it.
Joey Verana has 5 kids in Goddard, from preschool to high school. He worries about their exposure to vaping.
My parents both smoked, and anything we can do to keep kids from smoking.
The Centers for Disease Control say while e-cigs can help adult smokers quit, they can also be dangerous for minors. And Goddard has seen a recent surge.
I know the school district was set somewhere between 20 and 30 over the last couple of months.
Increasingly, those pods have had THC in them, the chief says. That's the active ingredient in marijuana.
We've got to do something to make sure these kids aren't getting these harmful devices.
The problem was state law doesn't outlaw minors in possession of the pods themselves, so officers either had to test to see if THC was in them or let the kids go.
You can't throw that many cases at a lab and expect to have any kind of a quick turnaround.
Instead, local police asked the city to add the vape juice pods to items minors are barred from possessing. It passed unanimously.
I just think that it couldn't be more fantastic.
Possession will now come with a $200 fine, though the judge can lower the amount if the teen completes community service or an educational program on the potential dangers of vaping. Some in town say this won't do much good because kids will be kids. But parents like Verona like the new ordinance.
Whatever they can do to educate them, just taking it away from them isn't going to do it. So if you can do something to make them know why it's not a good idea, that's even more fantastic.
Now, this is definitely, the chief said, a case of state law not keeping up with changes in technology per se. I know, Jim, you and I have had that conversation about possible vaping legislation. Is this something that you've looked at?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a bill. We've talked to federal and state, it's inside baseball, but the committee that deals with these kinds of issues, there's going to be a bill. What's amazing that we still today, 50 years after the Surgeon General said nicotine is a danger to your health, still find creative ways to deliver nicotine, and that's what vaping is. It's a different way to deliver nicotine. And FYI, newsflash, it's bad for your health, no matter the delivery system. And we've had deaths in Kansas, and so we should take steps to make sure that not only kids but adults are aware of the risk, because it was sold, and I don't think dishonestly, I don't think people realized at the beginning that it's not an alternative to smoking, it's just a different delivery system of nicotine.
Well, and there are supporters who are adamant that this is a safe way to stop smoking. But the CDC, and while the CDC says, yeah, it can help you stop smoking, they are adamant that it can be dangerous, especially the developing brains of kids. You know, and
it's true. Teenagers can be very creative in how to get into trouble. And this was mentioned in the story, but there are some people that have used the products as directed and been harmed. And I agree, long-term use would almost certainly be harmful. But there's also a lot of not using the product properly, particularly deliberately concentrating the fluids. And that's what this local ordinance is about, is that deliberately concentrating the fluids. I have to put myself on the side of the skeptics. I'm not convinced you can stop teenagers from doing foolish things this easily.
All right. Well, Ed, Jim, Michael, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topics or future ideas for shows. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.